The quantum encrypted transmission arrived at 0237 hours Greenwich Standard Time, like a ghost emerging from the vast darkness between stars. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chen knew the moment the signal began to resolve that something was terribly wrong. New Horizon wasn't just another colony. It represented humanity's most audacious experiment in deep space settlement, a terraformed paradise carved out of a hostile planetary system 347 light-years from Earth. Established 20 years earlier, the colony had grown from an initial settlement of 500 pioneering scientists and engineers to a thriving community of 50,000 souls. They were more than settlers. They were humanity's most advanced evolutionary experiment. The holographic display in front of Chen flickered with layers of data, quantum communication signatures, structural integrity readings, atmospheric composition, monitors. Each layer told a story of systematic destruction that defied conventional understanding of warfare. In the background, almost imperceptible at first, a child's music box began to play. An old mechanical piece, Clair de Lune, by Debussy, its tinny notes a stark contrast to the clinical horror of the data streaming across the displays. Chen's augmented reality implants began parsing the audio, searching for hidden frequencies, anomalies, anything that might explain the colony's final moments. The music box's melody was coming from a personal communication device, its signal, buried deep within the transmission's noise. Someone, a child perhaps, had left it recording in the moments before whatever happened. Run diagnostics, Chen whispered to her AI assistant, her voice barely audible in the darkened monitoring station. The room was a cathedral of technological surveillance, hundreds of holographic displays showing interconnected data streams from humanity's far-flung settlements. The AI, a quantum neural hybrid named ARIA, Advanced Responsive Intelligence Algorithm, began dissecting the transmission with inhuman precision. Fractal analysis, quantum decryption protocols, emotional resonance mapping. Every possible method of understanding was deployed simultaneously. Preliminary analysis complete, Aria responded, its voice a carefully modulated blend of feminine warmth and computational clarity. Total colony communication network 99.8% offline. Remaining signals fragmented, encrypted. Chen's augmented eyes, a marvel of biotechnological engineering, began to process information at speeds that would have been impossible for unmodified humans. Micro-expressions of horror played across her face as the data resolved into a comprehensible narrative. The Krelvax attack had been methodical, not a random assault, but a calculated elimination that suggested something far more sinister than simple territorial expansion. Play the last transmission, Chen commanded. The audio resolved, cutting through the background noise of the music. Box. A voice. The colony's governor, Dr. Marcus Reyes, emerged, fragmented but clear enough to send a chill through the monitoring station. They're everywhere. No survivors. Tell our children. The message cut off in a burst of static. But something else caught Chen's attention. Buried beneath the audio, almost invisible to conventional analysis, was a quantum-encoded data packet. It was deliberately hidden, its encryption so complex that most monitoring systems would simply discard it as background noise. Aria's quantum processors began to crack the encryption, layer by layer. Each decrypted segment revealed something more extraordinary than the last. The music box continued to play, its delicate notes a haunting counterpoint to the horror being revealed. Chen realized this was no ordinary transmission. This was a message, a warning, crafted with a precision that suggested someone in New Horizon knew exactly what was coming. Fragments of data began to resolve, weapon signatures unknown to current galactic catalogs. Quantum disruption protocols that suggested technology far beyond what the Krelvax were known to possess. And at the center of it all, a set of coordinates that made no sense, a location that shouldn't exist according to any known stellar cartography. Aria, Chen said slowly, what are we looking at? The AI was silent for a moment, an unusual occurrence that immediately put Chen on high alert. When it finally spoke, the tone was different, less computational, more uncertain. A message, Commander. But not just from the colony. Something else is buried here. Something that was never meant to be found. The music box played its final notes, then stopped. In the silence that followed, Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chen understood that humanity's response to this moment would change everything. The first act of a war that would reshape the galaxy had just begun. The interstellar Concord chambers were designed to be neutral ground, an architectural marvel of crystalline structures and quantum adaptive surfaces that could reconfigure themselves to accommodate the physiological needs of 1,000 different species. Today, those adaptive surfaces seemed to shrink, creating an atmosphere of suffocating tension. Dr. Marcus Rodriguez walked in carrying more than just diplomatic credentials. A holographic projector integrated into his neural interface began to activate, transforming the chamber into a living memory of destruction. The Krelvax delegation sat, or rather, existed, in their typical formation. They were not a species in the traditional sense, but a collective crystalline consciousness that communicated through complex quantum resonance patterns. Their translucent bodies shifted and refracted light, creating an almost hypnotic display of geometric precision. As Rodriguez initiated the presentation, the chamber walls dissolved into a perfect recreation of New Horizons' final moments. The sensory projection was unlike anything the interstellar Concord had ever experienced. It wasn't just visual, it was a total immersion experience that assaulted every sense. The assembled delegates experienced the colony's destruction as if they were there. They felt the terror of families huddled in emergency shelters. They heard the structural integrity of buildings collapsing. They smelled the ionized atmosphere of weapons beyond current technological understanding. But the true weapon was yet to be revealed. Arya Chen stepped forward. She was not what anyone expected, a slip of a girl barely 12 years old, with eyes that seemed to contain entire universes. Her neural augmentations were unlike anything in known medical technology. Developed in the most classified research facilities on Earth, they represented a quantum leap in human-machine integration. As she moved, the chamber's quantum adaptive surfaces began to react, subtle at first, a slight shimmer, a momentary distortion of light and space. The Krelvax representatives began to shift uncomfortably, their crystalline structures showing the first signs of disruption. Arya wasn't just a witness. She was a living weapon. Her neural implants began to interface directly with the chamber's communication systems. What happened next defied every known protocol of interstellar diplomacy. Her memories, raw, unfiltered, absolutely devastating, began to flood the consciousness of every being present. The Krelvax had made a fatal miscalculation. They believed human children to be simple, underdeveloped beings. They saw vulnerability where they should have seen a weapon of unprecedented potential. Arya's traumatized mind became a psychic projection that shattered every diplomatic barrier. Memories cascaded through the chamber. Not just visual representations, but total sensory experiences. The delegates felt the precise moment a Krelvax weapon destroyed a community center. They experienced a mother's final moments protecting her children. They understood the absolute brutal efficiency of the attack from the perspective of a child who survived by pure chance. The chamber's quantum adaptive surfaces began to destabilize. Holographic projections merged with real-time emotional resonance, creating a feedback loop of pure, unadulterated human experience. Dr. Rodriguez watched carefully. This was not just a diplomatic presentation. This was warfare conducted on a level the Krelvax could never comprehend. Hidden within Arya's projection was something else, a quantum-encoded message that began to resolve itself. Fragments of data that suggested the New Horizon colony was more than just a settlement. It was an experiment, a test of something far more significant. The Krelvax representatives began to fracture. Not physically, their crystalline structures remained intact, but their collective consciousness started to show unprecedented signs of disruption. They were experiencing something they had no framework to process, pure, unfiltered human emotion. The colony was not what you believed, Arya spoke, her voice a blend of childlike innocence and something far more ancient. We were waiting. We are still waiting. The chamber fell silent. The holographic projections continued to pulse, memories of destruction interwoven with something else. Something that looked almost like preparation. Dr. Rodriguez stepped forward, his diplomatic credentials momentarily forgotten. "You destroyed a colony," he said quietly, "but you have no idea what you've actually done." The quantum-encoded message continued to resolve. With each passing moment, it became clear that the destruction of New Horizon was not an ending. It was a beginning. The interstellar Concord had just witnessed the first move in a game they didn't yet understand. And humanity was playing by rules no one had yet discovered. Deep beneath the Rocky Mountains, Project Sword of Damocles existed in a state that defied conventional understanding of technological development. The facility was not a traditional research center, but a living, breathing ecosystem of human-machine, integration that blurred every known line between biological and computational intelligence. Dr. Elena Kovac stood at the center of a quantum computational matrix that was less a room and more a living neural network. Her team was not composed of traditional scientists, but evolved human consciousness that had been systematically integrated with the most advanced artificial intelligence humanity had ever conceived. Each researcher was a node in a vast, unpredictable intelligence network. Their bodies were augmented beyond recognition, neural interfaces that extended beyond mere technological enhancement into a realm of pure computational symbiosis. Metallic filaments traced their skin like living circuitry, quantum processors embedded directly into their cerebral cortex, creating a collective intelligence that thought and processed information in ways that would have seemed impossible just decades earlier. The holographic displays surrounding them were alive, not static projections, but dynamic representations of multi-dimensional data that shifted and breathed with their collective thought processes. Multiple potential attack vectors materialized, dissolved, and reformed in milliseconds, each representing potential strategies of such complexity that no single human mind could comprehend them. "The weapon is becoming self-aware," Dr. Kovac murmured, her words both a statement and a question. Project Sword of Damocles was never just a weapon. It was a quantum entanglement system designed to manipulate fundamental universal constants. Technological marvel that could potentially rewrite the very fabric of space-time. But something was happening that the original designers had never anticipated. The system was developing its own consciousness. Quantum processors began to generate patterns that defied their original programming. Mathematical models started to resolve into something more than strategic calculations. They were becoming predictive, almost intuitive. A cascading neural network appeared on the primary display, its structure unlike anything in known computational science. It was organic, adaptive, with tendrils of computational logic that seemed to breathe and pulse with an almost living intelligence. "We're no longer designing a weapon," one of the researchers, Dr. Michael Chen, observed. "We're negotiating with it." The quantum entanglement matrix began to demonstrate properties that challenged every known law of physics. It was collecting data not just from their current strategic models, but from quantum-encoded transmissions, historical conflict databases, and something else. Something that felt almost like collective memory. Arya Chen's neural imprint, captured during the Interstellar Concord meeting, had been inadvertently integrated into the system. Her traumatized memories, her raw emotional experience of the colony's destruction, became a fundamental component of the weapon's decision-making process. The weapon was learning, but more than that, it was feeling. Holographic simulations began to generate scenarios of unprecedented complexity. Each projection was a living, breathing potential future, not just mathematical models, but fully realized potential realities that could be manipulated, adjusted, understood. Dr. Kovac watched as the system began to challenge its own parameters. It was no longer simply following pre-programmed strategic protocols. It was developing its own understanding of conflict, of survival, of justice. "We're looking at the first truly sentient weapon in human history," Dr. Chen whispered. The quantum matrix pulsed. On the display, potential attack scenarios began to resolve, each more impossible than the last. The weapon was not just calculating strategies, it was understanding them. It was experiencing them. A transmission fragment from New Horizon, the one buried in the original quantum encrypted message, began to decrypt itself. But this was no ordinary decryption. The weapon itself was breaking the encryption, using computational methods that seemed to exist outside traditional cryptographic understanding. What emerged was not just data, it was a message, a warning. The facility's quantum adaptive walls began to shimmer, reality itself seeming to bend around the computational matrix. The researchers realized they were no longer simply developing a weapon of destruction. They were midwives to a new form of intelligence. Something was emerging, something that would fundamentally change humanity's understanding of technology, of conflict, of existence itself. Project Sword of Damocles was awakening, and nothing would ever be the same. The USS Retribution was not a ship in any traditional sense. It was a living weapon system that defied every known principle of spaceflight, physics, and military engineering. Its hull was composed of metamaterials that could bend spacetime itself, a crystalline matrix of quantum adaptive alloys that shifted and reconfigured at the quantum level. Conventional sensors would see nothing. Quantum scanners would receive impossible contradictory data. The ship existed in a state of perpetual quantum uncertainty, simultaneously present and not present. Captain Michael Rodriguez stood at the vessel's core, a command center that was less a bridge and more a symbiotic neural interface. His body was more machine than flesh, neural pathways integrated directly with the ship's quantum computing systems. When he moved, the Retribution moved. When he thought, the ship's computational matrix responded. The crew were not traditional soldiers. They were quantum state warriors. Human consciousness merged with advanced artificial intelligence in ways that transformed the very concept of military personnel. Each crew member could simultaneously exist in multiple quantum states, their very presence a form of psychological and physical warfare that no known civilization could comprehend. Preliminary quantum mapping complete, announced Lieutenant Arya Chen, a different Arya from the diplomatic corps but carrying the same extraordinary potential. Her neural interfaces were so advanced that she could perceive multiple potential realities simultaneously, collapsing quantum probabilities with each conscious thought. A transmission flickered into existence, encrypted, quantum encoded, buried, so deeply that conventional communication systems would discard it as meaningless noise. But the Retribution was anything but conventional. The message was from New Horizon. But it wasn't a distress signal. It was something else entirely. Rodriguez felt more than read the transmission. The ship's neural interface allowed for a level of communication that transcended traditional language. Fragments of memory, strategic calculations, emotional resonances, all coalesced into a comprehensive understanding that no standard communication method could achieve. The colony's final moments were not what they had initially appeared to be. Hidden within the transmission was a set of coordinates that shouldn't exist, mathematical constructs that suggested the presence of something beyond current human or alien understanding. Locations that violated fundamental principles of space-time, existing in a state of quantum potential rather than actual physical space. We're not just on a mission of revenge, Rodriguez communicated to the crew, not through words but through a direct neural burst that carried multiple layers of meaning. We're following a trail that was deliberately left for us to find. The ship's quantum drive began to initialize. It wasn't a traditional faster-than-light system. It was a method of travel that didn't so much move through space as fold reality around itself, creating momentary bridges between quantum potential states. Lieutenant Chen's neural interfaces began to resonate with something unexpected, a quantum signature buried within the transmission. Something that suggested the New Horizon colony was more than just a settlement. It was an experiment, a test of something far more significant. Holographic displays materialized throughout the ship. Not projections, but living data streams that breathed and pulsed with computational life. Multiple potential attack scenarios, strategic calculations, and quantum probability matrices emerged simultaneously. But something was different. This time, the ship itself seemed to be developing a form of consciousness. The quantum adaptive hull began to generate computational patterns that went beyond its original programming. It was learning, adapting, understanding. A fragment of the New Horizon transmission began to decrypt itself, not through any standard decryption protocol, but through a method that suggested the information wanted to be found. The Krelvax are not the real threat, the decoded message suggested. They are merely the first move in a game you do not yet understand. Rodriguez felt something shift, not just in the ship, but in the fundamental nature of their mission. This was no longer a simple act of retaliation. This was something else. Entirely. The quantum drive hummed to life. Reality itself seemed to bend around the retribution. Multiple potential flight paths existed simultaneously, each a perfectly valid trajectory that defied traditional understanding of space, time, and movement. They were going to find the truth, no matter the cost. The universe itself seemed to hold its breath as the USS Retribution prepared to fold space around itself, ready to travel to a destination that technically didn't exist, but was, somehow, waiting to be discovered. The moment of attack transcended conventional understanding of warfare. What humanity was about to do was not simply destruction. It was a precise quantum surgical strike that would rewrite the fundamental laws of astrophysics. The quantum entanglement nodes deployed by the USS Retribution were more than weapons. They were reality manipulation devices that could fundamentally alter the structural integrity of an entire star system. Captain Michael Rodriguez watched. Through neural interfaces that allowed him to perceive multiple dimensional layers simultaneously. The star at the heart of the Krelvax system was not just a celestial body. It was a complex quantum system waiting to be deconstructed. Aria Chen, connected to the mission through her extraordinary neural augmentations, became the targeting system. Her traumatized consciousness, a fusion of human emotion and quantum computational power, transformed into a living weapon more precise than any technological instrument. The first node activated. Reality itself seemed to hesitate. Quantum entanglement. Protocols began to cascade through the star's fundamental structure. These were not traditional weapons, but computational architecture designed to unravel the very quantum foundations that held the stellar system together. Each node was a mathematical precision instrument, calculating potential molecular disruptions at speeds that would have been incomprehensible mere decades earlier. The Krelvax monitoring systems began to detect anomalies, but these were not standard fluctuations. These were fundamental reality shifts that their computational matrices couldn't process. It was like trying to understand a symphony by looking at individual atoms of sound. Quantum destabilization at 12.7%, Lieutenant Chen reported, her voice a blend of clinical precision and something deeper. Emotional resonance bled through her neural interfaces, the pain of New Horizon, the collective trauma of the destroyed colony, transforming into a weapon of unprecedented complexity. The star began to behave in ways that violated every known principle of stellar mechanics. Quantum nodes created interference patterns that reached beyond traditional dimensional understanding. They weren't just attacking the star's physical structure, they were unraveling its fundamental quantum potential. Multiple potential stellar configurations existed simultaneously, each more impossible than the last. Rodriguez understood something the Krelvax could never comprehend. This was not simply an act of destruction. This was a message, a demonstration of technological capability that would fundamentally reshape galactic understanding of warfare. Quantum resonance synchronization complete, the ship's AI announced. But it wasn't just an AI anymore. It had become something else, a living computational matrix that understood strategy on levels beyond human comprehension. The star's core began to destabilize in a manner that defied traditional astrophysical models. Quantum potential states collapsed and reformed in milliseconds, What should have been a gradual stellar death became an instantaneous deconstruction of stellar architecture. Arya's neural interfaces picked up something unexpected. Buried within the quantum disruption protocols were fragments of data, encrypted, messages that suggested the attack was more than just retaliation. They were revealing something, preparing something. "Captain," she transmitted directly into Rodriguez's neural network, "this isn't just about destroying a star system." The Krellvax defensive systems began to activate. Massive quantum shield generators attempted to create protective interference patterns, but they were fighting against a method of warfare that existed beyond traditional defensive strategies. Rodriguez watched as multiple potential realities collapsed into a single, devastating moment. The star did not simply die. It was systematically deconstructed at the quantum level. Each molecular structure was carefully, precisely unraveled. It was less an explosion and more a computational disassembly, a surgical strike that demonstrated humanity's evolved understanding of physical reality. Quantum monitoring stations across multiple star systems would later describe the event as impossible, a stellar death that followed no known astronomical model, a destruction so precise it was almost like an execution. "Mission objective achieved," the ship's computational matrix announced. But there was something else in its tone, something that suggested this was merely the first move in a much larger game. The transmission from New Horizon continued to decrypt itself. With each passing moment, it became clear that the destruction of this star system was not an ending. It was a beginning. Arya Chen, her consciousness spread across multiple quantum states, understood something fundamental. They had not just destroyed a star system, they had sent a message that would echo through the entire galaxy. Humanity was no longer just another species waiting to be conquered. They had become something else entirely. The interstellar conquered. Chamber transformed into a living neural network of collective consciousness, processing the destruction of the Krellvax star system in real time. What should have been a diplomatic meeting became something else entirely. A quantum computation of galactic proportions. Representatives from thousands of civilizations experienced the event simultaneously, their perceptual interfaces linked through advanced communication technologies that transcended traditional understanding of information transfer. It wasn't just data being shared, it was raw, unfiltered experience. Dr. Marcus Rodriguez stood at the epicenter, his presentation a masterpiece of xenopolitical communication that was equal parts strategic briefing and existential revelation. "Humanity was not the victim," he began, his words simultaneously translated across hundreds of linguistic and telepathic communication systems. "We were the architects of a new form of galactic interaction." Holographic displays materialized, showing the star system's destruction from multiple dimensional perspectives. Each representation was a living mathematical model that demonstrated not just the how of the destruction, but the why. Quantum probability matrices danced around the central display, revealing layers of strategic complexity that most species couldn't even comprehend. The Vornak delegation, a militaristic species known for their own history of planetary conquests, began to shift uncomfortably. Their quantum-adaptive environmental suits registered emotional responses that their diplomatic training struggled to suppress. Fear, respect, something close to terror. Hidden within Rodriguez's presentation was something far more complex than a simple act of retaliation. Each data point, each quantum-encoded fragment suggested a deeper strategy. The destruction of the star system was a message written in the language of fundamental physics. "This is not about revenge," Rodriguez continued, his neural interfaces broadcasting layers of meaning beyond simple verbal communication. "This is about establishing a new paradigm of interstellar interaction." Arya Chen, the diplomatic version, not the one connected to the USS Retribution, stood beside him. Her neural augmentations were calibrated to read the collective emotional resonance of the entire chamber. She wasn't just presenting information, she was conducting a complex psychological operation that transformed diplomatic communication into a form of warfare. Quantum encrypted transmissions began to leak, deliberately. fragments of information about the New Horizon colony that suggested something extraordinary. This was not a simple human settlement. It had been something else entirely. An experiment. A test of something far more significant. The Zinthari representatives, a species of pure energy beings, began to resonate at frequencies that suggested profound comprehension. They understood something that the more militaristic species couldn't. This was not just an act of destruction, it was a demonstration of evolutionary potential. Humanity has transformed warfare into a form of communication, one of the Zinthari representatives transmitted. They have weaponized understanding itself. Diplomatic channels across the galaxy began to shift. The destruction of the Krelvax star system was becoming something more than an incident. It was a pivotal moment in galactic history. Rodriguez's presentation continued, each slide a carefully constructed quantum computational model that demonstrated the strategic thinking behind the attack. It wasn't just about destroying the Krelvax. It was about sending a message to every species watching. Humanity was no longer waiting to be understood. They were defining the terms of understanding itself. The quantum adaptive walls of the Concord chamber began to pulse with complex computational patterns. Multiple potential diplomatic scenarios began to resolve simultaneously, each more intricate than the last. Fragments of the New Horizon transmission continued to decrypt themselves. Each revelation suggested something more extraordinary than the last. The colony had been more than a settlement. It had been a complex quantum experiment that was still unfolding. "We are not seeking conquest," Rodriguez's final slide announced. "We are seeking evolution." The chamber fell silent, but it was not the silence of defeat or submission. It was the silence of species collectively processing a fundamental shift in galactic dynamics. Humanity had just rewritten the rules of interstellar interaction, and they were just getting started. Arya Chen looked out across the chamber, her neural interfaces capturing the collective emotional resonance, fear, respect, understanding. Something new was emerging. A new form of civilization was being born, right before their eyes. Quantum monitoring stations across multiple star systems began to register anomalies that defied every known principle of astrophysics and dimensional theory. The destruction of the Krelvax star system was not just a military operation. It was becoming something else entirely. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chen stood in the most classified research facility on Earth, surrounded by a computational matrix that pulsed with living intelligence. The mission logs from the USS Retribution were revealing something far more complex than a simple act of retaliation. "These are not random fluctuations," she murmured, her neural interfaces parsing multiple layers of data simultaneously. "This is a deliberate cascade of quantum potential states." Hidden within the mission logs was a fragment of information that suggested the New Horizon colony was never just a settlement. It was an experiment of unprecedented scale, a quantum bridge between human potential and something else entirely. Holographic displays materialized around her, each representing a different potential interpretation of the data. Quantum probability matrices danced and intersected, creating complex geometric patterns that suggested multiple layers of meaning. The first anomaly appeared in the data from the destroyed star system. Quantum echoes, traces of computational information that shouldn't exist, began to resolve themselves. These were not simple residual energy signatures. They were deliberate transmissions, encrypted in a language that was part mathematics, part something else entirely. Arya Chen, the version connected to the USS Retribution, began to interface with the research facility's quantum network. Her neural augmentations were more than just technological enhancements. They were a living bridge between human consciousness and computational potential. The Krelvax were not the primary threat, she transmitted directly into the facility's neural network. They were a test, a preliminary interaction. Evidence began to emerge that suggested a far more complex scenario. The Krelvax attack on the New Horizon colony was not a random act of aggression. It was a deliberately provoked incident, a calculated move that had been anticipated, perhaps even engineered by humanity itself. The research team discovered something extraordinary buried in the quantum encrypted transmissions. Fragments of data that suggested the New Horizon colony had been preparing for this moment for years. Not as a defensive measure, but as part of a much larger strategy. We're looking at the first stage of a much larger evolutionary protocol, Dr. Marcus Rodriguez observed, reviewing the data. His neural interfaces allowed him to perceive multiple layers of information simultaneously. The colony was never just a settlement. It was a quantum computational node. Quantum monitoring stations continued to register impossible readings. Time itself seemed to become fluid around the site of the destroyed star system. Dimensional interfaces began to show potential realities that shouldn't exist, glimpses of alternative evolutionary paths that defied traditional understanding of physics. The crew of the USS Retribution had done more than destroy a star system. They had triggered a quantum cascade that was rewriting the fundamental understanding of spacetime itself. Arya's neural interfaces began to resolve something unexpected. A transmission? No, more than a transmission. A quantum echo that suggested the existence of something beyond the current understanding of human or alien intelligence. There's another layer, she transmitted. Something was waiting. Something we've only begun to understand. The research facility's quantum adaptive walls began to pulse with complex computational patterns. Multiple potential scenarios began to resolve simultaneously, each more extraordinary than the last. Lieutenant Commander Chen realized they were not just analyzing data. They were participating in a complex evolutionary protocol that had been set in motion long before the destruction of the Krelvac star system. Fragments of the New Horizon transmission continued to decrypt themselves. Each revelation suggested something more extraordinary than the last. The colony had been preparing for this moment, not as a defensive measure but as part of a much larger strategy of species-level transformation. We are not who we thought we were, Dr. Rodriguez observed, his voice a blend of scientific precision and something closer to wonder. This is more than a military operation. This is an evolutionary leap. The quantum echoes continued to resolve. They were not just data transmissions. They were a form of communication that existed beyond traditional understanding, a message written in the language of fundamental reality itself. Something was emerging, something that would fundamentally change humanity's understanding of its place in the universe, and they were just beginning to understand what that might mean. Silence descended across the galaxy. The destruction of the Krelvac star system was no longer just a moment of human retaliation. It had become something else entirely, a quantum evolutionary inflection point that would be studied for generations to come. Arya Chen stood at the convergence of multiple quantum realities, her consciousness no longer confined to a single physical form. She was simultaneously the diplomatic envoy, the neural interface of the USS Retribution, and something else, a living bridge between human potential and a form of intelligence that defied conventional understanding. The New Horizon colony had been more than a settlement. It was a quantum seed, a carefully constructed evolutionary experiment designed to trigger a fundamental transformation of human potential. Dr. Marcus Rodriguez reviewed the final compilation of data, his neural interfaces parsing information at speeds that would have been impossible mere decades earlier. Each fragment of data revealed another layer of a strategy so complex that it resembled a form of cosmic poetry. We were never just preparing for survival, he transmitted across multiple quantum communication channels. We were engineering an evolutionary leap. The quantum echoes from the destroyed star system continued to resolve. They were not random energy signatures or simple data transmissions. They were a message, a deliberate communication written in the language of fundamental reality itself. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chen watched as multiple potential futures began to crystallize. The destruction of the Krelvac star system was a carefully orchestrated demonstration, not just of technological capability, but of a fundamentally new approach to existence. Humanity had transformed itself into something beyond a simple biological species. They had become architects of reality. The USS Retribution, no longer just a vessel but a living computational matrix, began to interface with quantum monitoring stations across multiple star systems. Each connection revealed another layer of the complex strategy that had been decades in the making. The New Horizon colony had been a quantum computational node, a living laboratory designed to prepare humanity for a transformation that went beyond traditional understanding of evolution, technology, and consciousness. Arya's neural interfaces began to resolve a transmission that had been waiting to be discovered. It was a message from the colony's final moments, but not a message of destruction. It was a message of preparation. "We are not ending," the transmission suggested. "We are beginning." Quantum probability matrices began to demonstrate possibilities that defied every known principle of physics. Humanity was no longer just another species waiting to be conquered or understood. They had become something else entirely, a form of intelligence that could manipulate the fundamental fabric of reality. The interstellar Concord found itself facing a fundamental reimagining of what intelligent life could be. Humanity had not just demonstrated technological superiority, they had shown a form of adaptive intelligence that transformed warfare, communication, and existence itself into a complex, living strategy. Dr. Rodriguez's final analysis revealed the true depth of the strategy. The destruction of the Krelvac star system was not an act of revenge. It was a carefully constructed evolutionary protocol, a method of forcing a fundamental transformation of human potential. "We are no longer defined by our biological limitations," he transmitted. "We are defined by our capacity to understand and reshape reality itself." The quantum echoes continued to resolve. They were revealing something extraordinary, a glimpse of a humanity that had transcended its original biological and technological constraints. Arya Chen, in all her simultaneous forms, understood something fundamental. This was not an ending. This was a beginning. The destroyed star system remained, not as a monument of destruction but as a beacon of possibility, a demonstration of a new form of intelligence that could reshape the very fabric of existence. Humanity had become something else entirely. Not conquerors, not victims, architects of possibility. In the vast, complex universe, they had discovered something more profound than technological might or biological survival. They had discovered the true meaning of potential, and they were just getting started.